O dark beast Parl, the world would never, could never, truly understand our love. Hello! I didn't hear you come in. Why, it's been so long since anyone's come to see me. Please, make yourself comfortable. I didn't prepare anything, but if you'd like, I guess we could talk about Bloodborne. You know, like we used to in the old days. I didn't really know how to start this video because it's been so long since I've sat down here in front of this camera, but I thought a little bit of humor might break the ice. Hello there! How are you? It's been quite some time since I've sat down here in front of this camera. It's actually the same camera. And talked to all of you out there. I hope you've been doing well. It's been a very crazy decade since I've made something like this. You know, Bloodborne is an incredibly important and special game to me. It's a game that changed my life forever. And it's not an exaggeration to say that it changed my life forever. The person I am, the places I've been, the people I've met, have been shaped by that one video game in ways that no other game has ever really deeply affected me. But, you know, as important as Bloodborne is to me, you know, the Pale Blood Hunt and even the name Redgrave was sort of something that I took to be a part of my past and not really a part of my present and definitely not a part of my future. And, you know, I have been asked by so many people over the years, you know, are you ever going to make more YouTube videos? And my answer was always the same. It was always no plans at the moment, which was my way of saying no. But as time goes on, and as we reach what is almost the 10-year anniversary of Bloodborne, which is crazy to think about, you know, 10 years, which on one hand is like, no, my precious youth, oh, my beautiful face, what have I done with my life, right? But but it's also like, it's exciting. It's also very exciting to think that like 10 years, almost 10 years have passed since that game first came out. And as we get closer and closer and closer to the big 10-year mark, I start to think about Bloodborne a lot more. And the more I think about it and the more, you know, I really, it's just like, yeah. The more I decided that I did want to sit down here again and do something. I don't know, I wasn't sure what, but I wanted to do something. And so here I am, almost 10 years later. Times have changed, things have changed. We all have more gray hairs than we did back then. But I think it would be nice, in celebration of this game that's almost 10 years old, to sit down now and talk about it, because we've come so far and our understanding of what this game is has come so far. And I thought it might be fun to take a look at one of the oldest and first mysteries of the game Bloodborne and kind of break it down using the information that we've gained over this past decade. So if you'd like to join me, then just like the old times, let's sit down and let's just talk about it. I have my outline here. And I have some notes, and I've got some references that we're going to look at. But just like the old days, I don't really have a script. So I don't know how long this is going to be, but I'm going to try and keep it condensed. Because we all know I'm very good at that, right? I'm very good at keeping videos to a reasonable length, a reasonable listening period. So without any further ado, welcome to the little things in Yharnam. I am your host, Redgrave. And today we are talking about Flora, specifically the flora of the moon. Now, one of the very first things that people noticed one of the very first mysteries that people stumbled upon was that in very, very rare occasions, you can go back to the hunter's dream and you'll find the doll. And she won't be standing around doing her normal, usual dialogue. Instead, she'll have a prayer that she speaks. And she'll kind of be like kneeling down and eyes closed. And it almost seems like she's like in a trance or something. And she's speaking this prayer. And we've got it here. So let's give it a little listen just so we can all refresh our memories. So please enjoy.
O Flora of the moon, of the dream, O little ones, O fleeting will of the ancients, let the hunter be safe, let him find comfort, and let this dream, his captor, foretell a pleasant awakening.
Great. So this was one of the very first big questions people had when they started really breaking apart this game. Is like, what is this? Now, there's a fantastic video by Lance McDonald. If you're not familiar with Lance, he is a hacker slash modder slash data miner, I guess, who is relatively well known. And he has a video where he breaks down, where he really goes into all of the code and the triggers behind this prayer and what actually causes the doll to do this. And if you're not familiar with Lance's work, you should definitely check it out, because this is one of many contributions to the Bloodborne community that Lance has given us. Now, in this video, he really breaks down what the exact trigger for the dialogue is. And unfortunately, and somewhat a little disappointingly, it's just random. It's pure chance. It's very rare. I know. I think everyone, myself included, was kind of hoping that there was like this really obscure trigger for it where you had to like rub your tummy and pat your head at the same time while doing specific things and doing it in a certain order in order to get the... But no, it's just a very low likelihood of happening every time you enter the dream. And now, one thing that people latched onto very, very quickly was that the word Flora in the prayer is capitalized. And this kind of caused a lot of people to go like, well, so what does this actually mean? What is Flora? What's going on here? Because it definitely sounds like the doll is praying to something. And she's asking for this thing that is watching over us to defend the hunter, us, the player, and is kind of praying for the safety of the hunter. And, the more you know about the game, the more you know that the hunter is really being guided and set upon their path, his or her path, by the moon presence, and that the moon presence is the figure that's kind of overseeing the hunter's dream. It's the thing that's kind of watching over the hunter and is making it, and we are sort of fulfilling the moon presence's plans, whatever they may be. And so a lot of people very naturally kind of latched on to this idea that what she was talking to was the moon presence, and that Flora was possibly the name of the moon presence. Now, some people were very adamant that Flora was not the name of the moon presence. And really, the reason for that, and it was very simple, which is that there's a note in the research hall, the Nightmare Research Hall, which calls the moon presence the nameless moon presence. And so for some people, it was very... it followed that, well, if the moon presence is nameless, if we're taking this note as accurate, the nameless moon presence, then why would it be called Flora? It wouldn't be called Flora. Flora must be something else. Right? It was kind of I think, a kind of reasonable conclusion to make. But some people disagree. Now let's very briefly just talk about the word flora, because it's a real word. There's kind of a misconception that the word flora means flower. It's not exactly accurate, but like we think of like a floral arrangement as being like an arrangement of flowers, and it does have its root in the Latin word floris, which does mean flower, but the word flora actually refers to like the plant life of a given area. There's also like your gut flora, which is it's a term referring to like the bacteria in your intestinal tract that is kind of have a symbiotic relationship with you and kind of helps you digest your food. There's also like it's a very minor thing, but there's also like a Greek goddess named Flora, who there's like one small story. It's like an obscure story where Flora helps Hera get pregnant. And so, given how central to Bloodborne pregnancy is, like that could be a thing there. Flora is actually I can hear my brother with his classics degree going, actually, Flora is the Latin or the Roman name for Chloris, which is the goddess. Not important. What is important is that many people were kind of interested in Flora and like, who is Flora? And like, what is Flora? What does that mean? Is it the moon presence? Is it maybe the moon presence? Is it not the moon presence? Is it something else? Who knows? And this was like a very quick discussion that kind of picked up very rapidly. And one person who had something to say about it was a German spy. If you're not familiar with a German spy, he is one of the like very, I guess you could use the term like an old head in like the Souls lore community, has been doing lore stuff for a very long time, back since before we called it a community, was making videos, is most known for his Demon Souls, probably most known for his Demon Souls content, where he would make videos about like, hey, let's walk through Boletaria Castle and let's look at stuff and let's examine like the environment and talk about things. Spy's Demon Souls work was probably one of my, just personally speaking, one of my big inspirations for when I started getting into like examining the lore. It's like Spy and Guardian Owl are like probably the two major inspirations for me when I first started getting into Demon Souls lore. So Spy was, for Bloodborne, Spy was contracted by the company Future Press. Future Press, who makes the big fancy guidebooks for the Souls games. For Bloodborne, they went into the community and they got some people from the community to come in and work on the Bloodborne guides, people from the Souls community. So like ENB did like the weapon data for the guide, and I know German Spy was involved and stuff like that. So after Bloodborne came out, Spy made a few videos where he was talking about like his experience working on the guide and what he thought about Bloodborne and stuff like that. And one of the things that Spy was saying in his videos is he basically accused accused is a strong word. One of the things Spy was suggesting in his videos was that dialogue had been removed from the game that kind of explained and filled in some missing pieces, and that the developers had intentionally taken out pieces of the story in order to make it more confusing or more mysterious. And now, if you're me, my immediate response my immediate conclusion was like, well, yeah, obviously, right? Like, it seemed very clear to me that, and they had even said kind of as much in interviews, that the way the story was developed is that they wrote out the story and then they just kind of cut out half of it and presented the rest to the player so that we can kind of fill in the blanks on our own and kind of come up with our own sort of narrative. So that made sense to me. But one of the things Spy said was that the name of the moon presence was Flora, and that's who Flora was, and that the moon presence was this sort of, present figure who was responsible for the hunter's dream, which was something that we kind of had figured out at that point. we kind of figured out that the moon presence was responsible for the hunters and was Korean. We had kind of figured all that stuff out. But basically what he was saying was that there was dialogue in the game that had been removed that made it a lot more explicit as to what was going on. Right? Great. But even with that, there were still some people who were very adamant that there was no real way to conclude one way or the other what Flora was or who Flora was talking about, or if Flora was or was not the moon presence. There's also the capitalization of the F in Flora. There are a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people, and people have said it to me that it's like it's basically being written in prose, and that the reason why the F is capital is because the doll is praying, and so the prayer is written in prose. And to be fair, there are lots of examples of Christian prayer where it is written out like that, and where words that are not proper nouns are capitalized, especially in the beginning of the sentence in order to give it emphasis. This is definitely like a thing that's in Christian prayer. Right? So anyway, with all that stuff said, the conversation raged on, and it went on and on and on. There's also one other interesting detail to be found in the Japanese script of the game. Now, I'm not personally I'm not really a big guy who's like really into analyzing the differences between the English script and the Japanese script. I think there are just a lot of people out there who have way more interesting things to say about like the impact of Japanese culture on the development of Bloodborne than I do. But every once in a while there are details in the Japanese script that stick out to me as interesting, and this is one of them. Now, let's take a very brief detour, and let's talk about the Japanese language and the way that the Japanese language is written out. Now, my Japanese is pretty terrible. My reading comprehension is okay. My listening is atrocious, and speaking is like, forget about it. But I do know a bit of the written Japanese language. Most of my experience studying the language in any type of formal manner has been through reading it. And so that's kind of what I know a little bit about. So I do feel qualified to give a general breakdown, but take this as a breakdown of a foreign language from a guy who doesn't speak the language fluently. Now, in Japanese, you basically have 3 different alphabets. It's one of the reasons why the language is so difficult to learn. You have, the first one is hiragana, which is basically a representation of different syllables. So you have like ra, ri, ru, de, do, different sounds that all have different characters representing those sounds. And you put the different sounds together in order to create different words. Right? Pretty simple so far. The next you have kanji. Kanji are the Chinese-derived characters, and they are basically used to combine hiragana together in order to create more complex words. So for just a very basic example, you have hi and to, which combine together to make hito, which is the word for person. Very basic, again, very basic, simple stuff. We're glossing over we're oversimplifying and glossing over an incredibly complex and beautiful language, but that's fine for our purposes. Now, the third alphabet, and the one that we really want to talk about, is katakana. Now, katakana is used in Japanese to basically, it was developed as a way to incorporate non-Japanese words into the language. I believe it was originally developed for Chinese words, and then as time progressed, it kind of grew to be any non-Japanese language. Anytime you're thinking of something that is, it's kind of an outdated term, but it's an old-fashioned term. But anytime you're thinking of something that could be like described as like English, you're probably thinking of something that would be written in katakana. So first are loan words, which are any non-Japanese word that's been incorporated into the language. So like the word for coffee is kohi. The word for a part-time job is baito, which is derived from the German Arbeit. And lots of other tons and tons of examples of many, many different loan words that you can find in Japanese written out in katakana. Katakana works like hiragana, where it's each sound, ra, ri, ru, re, ro, each sound corresponds to a different character. Same basic idea as hiragana. The other usage of katakana, so we had loan words. Loan words are in one category. The other usage of katakana are to be found in non-Japanese proper nouns. So places, names of places, people, things that you would be a proper noun, you would write out in katakana. So for example, my name is Brian. So in Japanese, you wouldn't call me Brian. You would call me Brian. And you would write it out in katakana because it's a non-Japanese name, right? Pretty simple stuff, right? Pretty clean, simple stuff, not too complex. 3 different alphabets. The one we're focused on is katakana, right? Got all that? Great, good. So let's go all the way back around to our discussion about the doll's prayer. I have here, courtesy of the fine people at Bloodborne, the S-Wiki, the Japanese S-Wiki. I have the script for the Japanese subtitles for the doll's prayer. So it's going to be, I don't know where I'm going to put it. I haven't decided where it's going to go yet. Maybe it's like right here, right? You can see it like right here. Great. So, of note in this script, you may notice that there's only one instance of katakana in the entire prayer. There's only one word that is spelled out in katakana, and it's furora. Furora. And so if you're reading this as a Japanese person, if you're a Japanese person playing Bloodborne for the first time, and you're reading the Japanese subtitles to the doll's prayer, you're going to see this word furora written out in katakana, and there's really no other way to interpret that if you're reading it in Japanese other than this is a proper noun. This is the name of something. This is the name of a person, of a place. This is the name of something, right? So that sticks out to me as interesting because Flora it's not a word that we use in common conversation, really, unless you're a botanist. So the fact that the doll uses it like that, people are like, okay, is she talking about the flowers in the hunter's dream? Is she talking about something? And in the Japanese subtitles, it really makes it specific that she's talking about something named Flora. What is that? Like, this is open to your interpretation, right? So again, with all these discoveries, all these different things, people going back and forth, spy saying one thing, other people saying other things, and then there was no real conclusion to this, right? It was just kind of an open mystery. Now, let's fast forward a little bit. 2016 rolls by, we get into 2017, right? Now, by the end of 2017, it was By the end of 2017, the PS4 had really been cracked into. There were exploits beforehand, and it was possible to see stuff, and it was possible to get into the PS4 in some small ways, but really it was around the end of 2017 that people really broke open the PS4 and were able to dig their way in. People out there who really know what they're talking about are going to say that, well, you could do it earlier, and they're right. But the way I kind of view it is that it's around winter 2017 that the PS4 really gets broken into. And naturally, once people had basically cracked the PS4, one thing that a lot of people were interested in was Bloodborne. What's in Bloodborne? What secrets, what mysteries are lurking in the depths of Bloodborne's files, right? And people cracked it open and started looking around. And one such person, on one Christmas morning, 2017, was the user known only as Jack Sparrow 420, which, by the way, just fantastic username, right? So props to Mr. Sparrow. So what Mr. Sparrow 420 discovered, or not discovered, but what he posted on Reddit was basically a dump of all of Bloodborne's sound effects and wave files and dialogue. He basically managed, it was the first time that anyone had really publicly dumped all of the audio in Bloodborne. There were other, I can think of at least one person I know of who had access to the audio before this, but this was really the moment where, like, whew, the floodgates opened. And what he discovered was all kinds of stuff in the audio files. Weird, unused monsters and status effects and items that were not a part of the finished game. All kinds of crazy things. And if you're interested in, by the way, everything I'm talking about, all the videos and all the posts that I'm talking about, there's going to be links somewhere in the, I don't know, where's the YouTube description these days? Is it still in the bottom? Anyway, there's going to be links to all this stuff. And so if you're interested, I check it out because it's very interesting. And so there's all kinds of stuff. And we're not going to go into everything that's been dug up, and we're not going to talk about all of the cut content of Bloodborne that's been discovered, because then this would be a 9-hour video, and I can't do that. I've got stuff I got to do, right? Cool? Everyone cool? Great. So, one thing that Mr. Sparrow discovered, and this was really a really big deal, was some dialogue from Gehrman that isn't in the finished game. And it's dialogue from Gehrman where he really kind of tells you what's going on. And it's interesting because, you know, in the beginning of Bloodborne, Gehrman kind of introduces himself to you as like, hello, I'm your helper. I'm going to guide you. I'm going to tell you what's what. I'm going to show you what to do. And he kind of does that in the beginning, where he's like, you should go to Old Yharnam and get the chalice. And, you know, you got to watch out for Upper Cathedral Ward. He kind of does that in the beginning. But by the time you're halfway through the game, he kind of bounces. Gehrman's just kind of gone. You only ever see him sleeping in the garden, right? He's just kind of out there. And so this dialogue that was dug up is kind of interesting to me because, and we're going to listen to it in a minute, so hold it, because you're like, what did he say? What did he say? Just be patient. Because it's interesting because he kind of gives you sort of a breakdown of exactly what's going on. And it sounds like, and we're going to listen to it in a second, so hold on. It sounds like the dialogue is taking place at the very end of the game, after you've beaten Marigo's wet nurse, after the Hunter's Dream is burning down. You would encounter Gehrman, and he would talk to you. Now, one other thing that's interesting about this is that he calls you Lawrence. And that's very interesting. And it sounds like either he thinks you're Lawrence, or he believes you're Lawrence, or he's in his head and he's talking to Lawrence in his head. We're kind of going to gloss over that right now, because who Lawrence is and like what Lawrence's deal is and what the character Lawrence is something that has had like a ton of different iterations. And there's been a ton of, during Bloodborne's development, the character Lawrence went through a bunch of different evolutions, if you will. And so he's going to call you Lawrence, but for the purpose of this video, we're just going to kind of ignore that. Okay? Okay.
Hunters are held here to be sent on horrific hunts, their souls rotted by blood and madness. We've no need for this accursed abode. Let flame cleanse this house of horrors. These frightful things. Look at them burn. All ye hunters, let it be known. We are free. Free as the wind. Lawrence, the end is not far away now. Every last dream will burn out, and Flora will return from the moon. As for us, the time has come to honor our vows. Hunters are needed no longer. You and I shall fight to the death, and she will consume the victor. The way we've always said we'd end it. You recall? Oh, Lawrence. Of course you remember. And...
Oh, okay. There we go. So, lot going on there, right? Lot going on there, right? So, immediately when I first heard this felt like it slotted things into place, where it's like, okay, this was the dialogue that Spy must have heard in whatever pre-build of the game that he had when he was making the guidebook. This is where the Flora stuff comes from. This dialogue was removed for whatever reason. We don't know why it was taken out, but it was taken out. And so, to me, it kind of slotted into place. The fact that Gehrman... It's funny because, you know, I spent a month writing the Pale Blood Hunt, and if there had been a line in the finished game where Gehrman said, "Oh yeah, the Hunter's Dream is a place where the moon presence 6 people on horrible monstrosities, and then they fight to the death, and the moon presence eats it," it would have made my life so much easier if that line had been in the game, but it wasn't. And so, you know, very notably, right there, he says, Flora will come down from the moon, and we will fight to the death, and she will eat the winner, right? Like, he straight up spells it out for you. He really just tells you what's about to happen. And it's fascinating to me. Because, like, you know, that moment where the moon presence you first see the moon presence, that moment in, you know, the field, is so powerful because it comes so out of nowhere. It's just this, you turn around and this thing is just there. And you don't know what you're looking at. You're like, whoa, what the fuck is that? And then the fight just starts, and then it, you know, it grabs you. It's such like a great moment of just like this unknowable, nameless thing coming down. And so the idea that the moon presence is named Flora, and interestingly, as Gehrman says she, so like even giving the moon presence gender, I think is very interesting. Because, you know, it's interesting because like Odin is very like male, right? Like Odin is kind of described as this male force. It is impregnating women. It is like, you know, sowing its seed, so to speak. And so to have the counterbalance, and like cause is obviously, you know, mother cause is obviously like a female thing. So I think giving the moon presence gender is interesting but I think that the reason why giving the moon presence a name and a gender kind of sticks out to people is that it almost takes away from the kind of moment of this nameless, unknowable thing coming out. But really, to me, that dialogue, it makes it crystal clear that, like, Flora, they're talking about the moon presence. And, like, you'd say, like, well, maybe they're talking about them, they're referring to the moon presence, but that's not actually its name, so it's still nameless. And it's like, well, what is a name other than something you're called by? So if the doll and Gehrman are both calling the moon presence Flora, are both referring to it as Flora, then Flora is the name of the moon presence. Open and shut case, case closed, right? That's how it feels to me personally. But I understand why people might be opposed to that idea, because Bloodborne's narrative has such a dreamlike flow to it intentionally. It's such a surreal experience that your very first time playing through. And I know it's hard to remember your first time through Bloodborne. It's been so long, but you really do finish that game going, what the fuck just happened? And part of me wonders, like, if Gehrman had just told us, like, hey, now we're going to fight, and then a big monster is going to come down and eat the winner. Like, part of me wonders if that moment would be lost. If that moment of, what the fuck is that, would be lost. Because, and I think a lot of people think it would be more interesting. And I think it would be more interesting without that dialogue. And clearly the developers agree because they took it out. Right. And again, this is another thing it's easy to forget these days, because, it's so easy to data mine stuff now. Or actually, I shouldn't say that. It's so much easier to data mine games now that we have access to cut content and data mine files pretty much immediately. We know within a week of Elden Ring coming out, we knew everything that was in that game's files. But it's important to remember that the dialogue was removed for a reason. It wasn't an accident. It's like, oops, we accidentally cut out the dialogue where Gehrman explains the plot. Oh no! Well, it's too late now. The game's already right. Like, that's not what happened, right? So someone at some point decided to take out that dialogue that kind of explains it, and it's interesting to me. And we'll never really have an answer as to why, but we can speculate about it. But that's Flora. Flora of the moon presence. That's Flora. What do you think? Do you think Flora is the name of the moon presence? I'd love to find out. I'd love to hear from you, all of you who are watching this right now. I'd love to know what you think. So let me know. I'm interested. I never thought I would be doing this again. I never thought I would be sitting here in front of this I never thought I would be making this video. But here I am. And, I think the next question I'm going to get a million, or not a million of, oh, look at me with millions of views. No. The next question I'm going to get asked is, are you going to do more of this? And probably not. This is probably a one-time revisit to Bloodborne, because Bloodborne is such a beautiful game. It's such a wonderful game. It's such an amazing game. And I love it so much. I love that game so much. And I'm sure you do too. It's been a long 10 years, but I hope you're doing well. Right? We're all in a different place, doing different things, being different people. But, we're all doing okay. And so this might be the last time you ever hear from me. This might be the last video I ever put on YouTube. And if that's the case, then that's okay, because I didn't think I was going to make this one anyway. And wherever we're going, whatever we're doing, however you've been, whatever you're up to, I hope it goes well. And I hope you find your worth in this waking world. Take care.